There is a city that sits at the edge of the continent, perched between fault lines and rising water, wrapped in fog that rolls in from the Pacific like a warning no one has ever fully heeded. San Francisco has survived earthquakes, fires, plagues, and economic collapses. It has rebuilt itself so many times that reinvention feels almost native to its character. But what is coming over the next 100 years may be different, not a sudden catastrophe. Something slower, something the city cannot simply rebuild its way out of. And 40 miles to the south, on the flat lowlands that ring the southern tip of San Francisco Bay, sits the most economically powerful stretch of real estate in human history. The companies built there rewrote how the world communicates, travels, shops, and thinks. Their founders became the wealthiest individuals ever recorded. Their headquarters became pilgrimage sites for entrepreneurs from every continent. What very few people talk about is how much of it sits barely above sea level. By the time today's children reach old age, some of those campuses may be surrounded by water. By the time their grandchildren are born, some of them may be beneath it. Stay with us, because what science projects for the next 100 years, for the city, for the bay, and for the valley, is something the tech industry itself has never managed to fully compute. All future projections in this video are visualized using AI-generated imagery, constructed from current peer-reviewed scientific research. They are projections, not certainties. The science, however, is real. Let us begin where San Francisco itself began, at the water's edge. The Embarcadero today is one of the most photographed waterfronts in the world. The ferry building, restored after the 1989 earthquake, anchors the northern end of a promenade that draws millions of visitors each year. The bay here feels timeless. The same water, more or less, that greeted the first Spanish settlers in 1776. But the bay is not the same, and it will not stay the same. Scientists at the California Ocean Protection Council and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have been measuring what most people cannot yet see. The water is rising. Slowly, measurably, irreversibly. Current projections under moderate emission scenarios estimate that the San Francisco Bay could rise between 1 and 1.6 meters by 2100. Under high emissions scenarios, the ones that become more plausible with every year that global targets are missed, that number climbs to nearly 2 meters or more. 1 meter may not sound like much, but in a city built on reclaimed tidal flats, on fill that was poured directly into the bay over the last 2 centuries, 1 meter can mean entire neighborhoods. The neighborhoods most at risk are also among the most densely populated, most economically active, and most historically significant in the entire Bay Area. Mission Bay, developed aggressively over the last 25 years as San Francisco's new biotech and healthcare district, sits almost entirely within the projected inundation zone. The hospitals, the research centers, the luxury apartments facing the water, built on land that was bay floor within living memory, are already vulnerable to the kind of storm surges that a warmer ocean will generate with increasing frequency. By 2100, if current projections hold, Mission Bay will not look like it does today. It may still exist, but only because of infrastructure investments that San Francisco has not yet fully committed to building. The downtown core sits on slightly higher ground, which offers a degree of protection. But the financial district faces a different kind of transformation, one driven not just by water, but by everything water brings with it. Chronic flooding at the edges, saltwater intrusion into the freshwater table, infrastructure built for a climate that no longer exists. The city's storm drain system was designed for the rainfall patterns of the 20th century. By 2060, scientists project that atmospheric rivers, those concentrated bands of moisture that already bring devastating rain to California, will intensify in both frequency and volume. The drains will not keep up. The streets will flood in ways that are not dramatic, not cinematic, but persistent and economically corrosive. The city that adapts, and there is strong reason to believe San Francisco will attempt to adapt, will look visibly different from today. Not ruined, not abandoned, but engineered in ways that reveal the pressure it is under. Raised floors, reinforced seawalls, parks that double as retention basins, architecture that negotiates with water rather than ignoring it. Cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam have been doing this for decades. San Francisco, with the wealth and the engineering talent that surrounds it, has every resource needed to follow that path. What it has historically lacked is the political will to act before the crisis becomes undeniable. Whether that changes in the next 25 years may determine the shape of the city for the following 75. Not all of San Francisco is equally threatened. The neighborhoods built on bedrock, the hills that give the city its iconic silhouette, are far more resilient to sea level rise. Twin Peaks, No Valley, the Castro, the Sunset's inland blocks. These areas will likely look recognizable in 2100, altered by decades of climate shifts, but not existentially threatened by the bay. In a deeply ironic inversion of today's real estate dynamics, the neighborhoods that have historically been less glamorous, the elevated, fog-dense, difficult-to-drive hillsides, may become the most valuable land in the city by the end of the century, simply because they remain dry. The geography of desirability will shift. It already is. The waterfront properties that command the highest prices today, the ones with unobstructed bay views from floor-to-ceiling windows, are precisely the ones that face the greatest physical risk. In 100 years, a bay view may carry a different kind of weight. One structure above all others defines San Francisco's identity on a global scale. And it is worth asking what 100 years will mean for the bridge that has come to represent the city itself. The Golden Gate Bridge is, in engineering terms, a masterpiece that has been continuously maintained and upgraded since its completion in 1937. Its towers rise 227 meters above the water. Its roadway sits roughly 67 meters above mean high tide. Sea level rise, even at the higher projected ranges, does not threaten the bridge structurally. What changes is everything around it. The bridge itself will likely still stand in 2125, but the bay it crosses will be wider, deeper and more active than the one we cross today. The communities at its feet will have renegotiated their relationship with the water. And the fog that has always been San Francisco's most distinctive atmospheric signature, that grey, drifting presence that locals either love or resent, may thin and shift as Pacific temperatures and wind patterns change across the century. San Francisco without its fog is still San Francisco, but it would feel like a different city. Like a face you recognize but cannot quite place. But San Francisco is only one part of this story. 40 miles south, the Bay Area becomes something else entirely. The hills flatten, the sky opens, and the land that became the most consequential strip of real estate in the history of technology, drops almost imperceptibly toward the water. Much of what the world calls Silicon Valley sits at elevations of just 1 to 3 meters above current sea level. Menlo Park, where some of the largest venture capital firms in the world have offices. East Palo Alto, the northern edge of Mountain View, the western shores of the South Bay adjacent to Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. Under a 2-meter sea level rise scenario, which falls within the range of current scientific projections for 2100 under high emissions, these areas do not simply flood during storms. They become intertidal zones, not catastrophically, not overnight. Over decades, through a process of gradual inundation, increased storm surge, saltwater intrusion into the groundwater, and the slow economic logic of insurance markets withdrawing from flood-prone land, the geography of Silicon Valley will change. And the question that no earnings report has ever fully addressed is, what happens to the most valuable technology ecosystem in human history when the ground beneath it becomes unreliable? Apple's campus in Cupertino sits at a slightly higher elevation than the bay's immediate shoreline. It is not, by current projections, among the most immediately vulnerable properties in the valley. Meta's campus in Menlo Park tells a different story. It sits on the western edge of the South Bay, separated from open water by a relatively narrow strip of bay trail and restored wetlands. In a world of 2-meter sea level rise, the margins between campus and bay become something that engineers and insurers will not be able to ignore. Google's original campus in Mountain View, the Googleplex that became one of the most famous corporate headquarters in the world, sits in a city whose eastern neighborhoods are among the most flood-exposed in the entire South Bay. The difference in elevation between the Googleplex and the water's projected reach in 2100 is, in some projections, measured in centimeters rather than meters. None of this means these companies disappear. Companies are not buildings. The intellectual capital of Silicon Valley is not stored in the soil. Technology firms have already proven, especially after the pandemic, that their workforce can operate anywhere. But something would be lost, The power of Silicon Valley was never entirely logical. It was also cultural, relational, accidental. The density of talent, capital, and ambition in a small geographic area created something that resisted full replication elsewhere, despite decades of attempts. If the physical ecosystem erodes, if firms relocate, if campuses go dark, if the infrastructure becomes too costly to maintain, the question of whether Silicon Valley's magic migrates with its people or stays behind in the rising water has no obvious answer. History suggests that great centers of innovation do not die quickly. They fade. They migrate. They transform into something adjacent but no longer the same. Silicon Valley in 2100 may still carry the name. It may still host technology companies. But the physical landscape that gave it its particular character, the sprawl, the sunshine, the proximity of university and capital and ambition, will have been renegotiated by forces that no algorithm predicted and no venture fund had a thesis for. There is another possibility, one that is already being quietly planned by environmental engineers and regional agencies who understand what is coming. Managed retreat, not abandonment but intentional redesign. The strategic withdrawal of development from the lowest lying land, the restoration of tidal marsh along the bay's southern edge, the creation of a natural buffer that the bay can expand into without catastrophic consequence. In this scenario, Silicon Valley does not drown. It retreats uphill and inland. The valley's geographic center shifts west and south, away from the bay's reach, toward higher ground in San Jose and Santa Clara and the foothills of the Diablo Range. It would be a valley reorganized by its own environment, which would be in its own way a fitting kind of disruption. San Francisco and Silicon Valley were always part of the same system. The city and the valley, the culture and the capital, the history and the future. The bay between them was the connector, the constant, the thing that defined both. In 100 years, the bay will be bigger, the water will be higher. The boundaries between land and water will have shifted in ways that a resident of today would find unsettling, even as a resident of 2100 finds them simply normal. Because adaptation, in the end, is what the Bay Area has always done. The question is only whether it adapts fast enough, wisely enough, and fairly enough, so that what endures is more than just the parts of the city wealthy enough to build a wall against the tide. The fog still rolls in from the Pacific. Some things may not change, but the city it covers will be different. And 40 miles to the south, where the world's most powerful industry chose to build its home in the flatlands beside a rising bay, the reckoning will have been quieter, slower, and in some ways more profound. Every great civilization builds at the water's edge. Every great civilization eventually learns what the water thinks of that decision. If you want to be here when we find out what the next city is facing, you know what to do. And tell us in the comments, which place should we look at next? Which city, which coastline, which valley sitting just above the waterline waiting? The next chapter is yours to choose.